Hey everyone, in this mini lecture, I'll be talking about benzodiazepines, specifically the acute and chronic effects and their use and abuse. So benzodiazepines work by increasing the effects of GABA, which if you'll remember is the no-go transmitter. It's the most important inhibitory transmitter in the brain. It stops signals from being sent all across the brain. And the idea is that by increasing GABA, no-go activity, it stopped an overproduction of firing of neurotransmitters, and that correlates somehow to a lessened anxiety experience because also it suppresses the neurotransmitter glutamate. These two kind of go together. GABA is the no-go transmitter, glutamate is the go transmitter. So increasing GABA decreases glutamate, slows everything down in the brain. You get that sedating effect, and that also somehow corresponds to lessened anxiety and thoughts that produce anxiety. The exact mechanism is unclear. Again, for a lot of these substances, we don't know exactly how the effects, what's happening in the brain causes the subjective experience on the end of the user. But we do know that this is how it's working on the brain and that when it's being used, people are reporting these symptoms. So at low doses, people feel a sense of relaxation, decreased anxiety, kind of this mellowing kind of feeling, this sedating, drowsy feeling. At higher doses, you get things like lightheadedness, vertigo, drowsiness more intensely, slurred speech and muscle incoordination, so like kind of losing the ability to coordinate your body and move your body around and function, amnesia, trouble with memory and concentration, and then ultimately at high enough doses, coma and death. So they are and can be very dangerous substances. The biggest risks related to benzodiazepines is in terms of the compounding effects that they may have with the similar and drugs. So one is that benzos impair the person's memory. So oftentimes when it comes to overdoses, something that can happen is people forget that they took one in the first place. And so someone's been prescribed, especially for something like sleep problems, where the benzodiazepine is kept near the bed. It's something that's taken before bed to help the person fall asleep. It's short acting, and the effects kick in, and the person doesn't remember if they took the substance. And so then they take another one. And because of that compounding effect, it can lead to overdose. Also, sometimes people are not aware of the additive or synergistic effects of benzodiazepines. And if you'll recall, additive effects are when you take more and more of the same drug in order to obtain a high or a sensation or an effect. And that's needed because of tolerance. And so someone can be seeking an effect for therapeutic reasons, like they're feeling anxious and they want to feel not anxious. Or it could be they're seeking a recreational feeling, like a high or feeling mellow. But either way, it's because of tolerance. The person is taking more and more of the same drug. And benzodiazepines have an additive effect where the depressant effects of the drug are compounded by taking more of it. Synergistic effects would be taking different drugs, but drugs that have the same effect on the body system or same effect on the neurotransmitters, and that increases and amplifies the effects of both drugs. So, for example, alcohol and benzodiazepines both function on the same neurotransmitter, GABA, in the brain, and taking those two drugs together increases the effects of both drugs if you compared to if you would take one individually. And so that person experiences like in more intense mellowing out, but it can also impact the other depressing effects on the central nervous system, like breathing. And so it amplifies and makes it worse for the user in terms of the negative effects when two drugs are taken that have the same impact on the brain but are different drugs, and that's called synergistic effects. Alone, Benzodiazepines can be abused on their own, but often what is happening is people are using them in conjunction with other drugs recreationally. And that's what's leading to a lot of the risk related to benzos, apart from their addictive potential individually. They're commonly mixed with alcohol, commonly mixed with opioids. And also sometimes methamphetamine and cocaine users, people who are taking stimulants, use benzos to come down from their stimulated high. So someone who's using meth or cocaine may be up, taking uppers, and then want to come down and regulate down so that they can sleep or do whatever they need to that's like not at that high intensity level. And so they take a benzodiazepine to bring them back down to sort of baseline. But there is, like I mentioned before, synergistic effects when benzos are taken in combination with drugs that act on the same parts of the brain. So alcohol and opioids in particular, this is an incredibly lethal combination of drugs to take. It can lead to overdose almost always, but that an opioid is needed in order for that fatality to occur. But alcohol and a benzodiazepine can cause fatal respiratory depression because of that synergistic effect. On its own alone, benzodiazepines are rarely lethal. Again, unless someone's taking more and more and more of the same benzo because they forgot they took it in the first place, that could be a potentially additive effect. Or the real risk with benzodiazepines is addiction. And so benzodiazepines create a tolerance in the user in the same way that most of the drugs do that we've talked about this year. There are, though, some interesting concepts related to tolerance that benzos really illustrate well. So drugs that are in the same class or category where they share the same receptor sites in the brain can cross over and affect the user's tolerance for those drugs. So, for example, alcohol and other sedatives, if someone uses one of those frequently enough, they can develop a tolerance to the other substance. So, if someone is a heavy drinker of alcohol, through cross tolerance, they can develop tolerance to benzodiazepines, which act on the same neuroreceptors. That would be called cross tolerance. And then additionally, cross dependence is when the body becomes dependent on that substance in order to function regularly. It can be the case that if someone is an alcohol user, chronic alcohol user, they could also be dependent on benzodiazepines, meaning benzodiazepines can serve the same role that alcohol does in the user's dependence. So that's why when someone is going through alcohol withdrawal, giving them a benzodiazepine can mitigate those withdrawal symptoms, keep them healthy enough to detox from alcohol. Benzodiazepine withdrawal, like alcohol withdrawal, can be very severe. And generally, like most withdrawal, it's manifested with the opposite symptoms that the drug itself causes. So benzos are a depressant, and what ends up happening with benzo withdrawal is an overactivation of the central nervous system. So headaches, tremors, twitches, nausea, vomiting, feeling anxious, feeling restless, tachycardia or irregular heartbeat, cramping, yawning, hypertension, like increased blood pressure, can't sleep, and then also potentially seizures. So when GABA is not activated anymore by the benzos, the glutamate in the brain increases. It's sort of like a reaction to the lack of this drug that's been in the system for so long. And so the glutamate is the excitatory neuron. It's the neuron that gets things going and gets things firing. And that's when you get this overactivation of the central nervous system during benzo withdrawal, which can be really severe and require hospitalization. These symptoms typically wouldn't appear until about 3 or 6 days after the last dose. And then they can, for shorter acting benzos, they last about 7 to 20 days. And then for longer acting ones, these withdrawal symptoms can last for closer to a month. And so because of this, in order to avoid withdrawal symptoms, it takes several months to taper off the drug. And so if someone wants to stop using benzos, the best thing that they can do is to slowly and gradually reduce the amount that they're taking and to do it under medical supervision. Like you must talk to a doctor if you're going to try to come off of one of these benzos and if you've been using it chronically. Otherwise, you can run into really nasty withdrawal symptoms.